Get out. We don't serve women like you here. This isn't a charity cafeteria. I said, go away. The manager's open hand struck the black woman across the cheek, and the sharp sound carried across the polished marble. A turquoise silk scarf slipped from her fingers. She was 42 and she was a chief executive officer. He had no idea. She slowly turned her face back toward him. Her voice stayed soft, almost a whisper. Sir, please don't touch me again. He looked down at her with contempt, leaned closer, and told her that black women like her didn't belong in his store. She smiled. That smile was the last peaceful moment of his career. Earlier that day, Camille Whitmore woke in the brownstone she had kept almost exactly as her mother left it. No alarm, no staff, no driver, just the smell of coffee and sunlight moving through linen curtains her mother had chosen years before. Camille was 42, black, born in public housing in Detroit, and raised by a woman named Loretta Whitmore, who worked 3 jobs and almost never complained. Loretta had passed away after a fast and cruel battle with cancer. Camille kept the house the same curtains, the same kitchen table, the same cracked sugar bowl beside the stove, the same framed photograph on the mantel. In that picture, Loretta stood beaming in a navy blue dress while holding a turquoise gift box with gold letters that read, Ashford and Vale. Inside that box had been a turquoise silk scarf. Loretta had saved for an entire year to buy it. Tips from 3 jobs. Coins from the laundromat jar. Birthday money she never spent on herself. She had gathered it all so she could give her daughter 1 scarf from that Fifth Avenue store for her Harvard Law graduation. Camille still remembered opening the box. Her mother's hands were shaking, not from nerves, but from pride. The kind of pride that comes from sacrifice and still feels as if the gift can never equal the love behind it. 1 scarf, 1 year of saving. That was the kind of love Loretta gave. Camille stood in front of the photograph with her coffee and whispered, Mama, the acquisition is closing. We did it. What almost no one outside her inner circle knew was that Camille wasn't simply a successful businesswoman. She was the chairwoman and chief executive officer of Pinnacle Holdings Group, one of the largest private equity firms on the East Coast. Her firm had recently completed a hostile takeover of the parent company that owned Ashford and Vale. The deal was worth $1.5 billion. The public announcement had not yet been made. Soon, Camille would officially control every store, every employee badge, and every square inch of marble in the Ashford and Vale chain, including its Fifth Avenue flagship. But before she entered the boardroom as the new owner, she wanted to see the store one more time. Not as the chief executive officer, not with cameras, not with handshakes, not with executives standing in a line and rehearsing smiles. She wanted to walk through those doors the way her mother once had, as an ordinary black woman carrying ordinary money, and see how the store treated her when nobody knew who she was. Her phone buzzed. It was Dorian Beckett, her chief operating officer, and trusted right hand for many years. Camille, Pristine needs your approval. Also, you're not going to that store alone, are you? I just want to walk the floor, Dorian, before they put on a show for me. He sighed. He knew that tone. There was no arguing with it. Camille ended the call and dressed deliberately. Worn jeans, scuffed leather boots, a plain gray cardigan, no rings, no earrings, no makeup. Her hair gathered into a simple puff. The only jewelry she wore was her mother's thin gold chain. She looked in the mirror. She looked like any woman out running errands in the city. Good. Then she opened a dresser drawer and took out a small silver brooch. She pinned it to the car just above her heart. Hidden inside the brooch was an ultra-high-definition body camera with a wide-angle lens and enough storage to record the entire visit. Camille used it during mystery shopper audits across all 12 companies her firm owned. The camera had a wide-angle lens and 64 gigabytes of storage. Almost no one ever noticed it. People rarely looked that closely at a black woman's cardigan. Camille took the A train from Harlem to 59th Street. She stood for the end of her ride, one hand holding the overhead rail while the city blurred past scratched glass. Then she walked onto Fifth Avenue. The Ashford and Vale flap rose above the sidewalk like a cathedral built for money. Vaulted glass ceilings, gold leaf trim, white marble columns. Inside, a pianist played softly enough that the click of shoes across the floor still carried through the room. Everything about the entrance seemed to whisper the same message. You do not belong here. Camille walked in anyway. The doorman hesitated before opening the door. A white couple near the perfume counter glanced up, then glanced at each other. A saleswoman suddenly became very interested in rearranging a display she had already arranged. Camille didn't flinch. She walked straight toward women's accessories. She was looking for one thing: a turquoise silk scarf, the same style her mother had once saved so long to buy. This time, Camille wanted to purchase one for her niece's upcoming college graduation. She found the display. Standing beside it was a young black woman with a name tag that read Kiara Bell. She was 24, and although her smile looked slightly nervous, it was genuine. Can I help you find something, ma'am? The turquoise silk, the mason weave. Kiara's face brightened. We do carry it. Honestly, it's my favorite piece on this floor. For a little while, the world felt warm. Two black women talked about silk, color, texture, and craft inside a store that had already made one of them feel watched the moment she entered. Then the warmth ended. From the mezzanine, a man in a charcoal blazer lowered his clipboard. His name was Preston Hargrove. I was 48, white, and had managed that floor for more than 2 decades. He had been watching Camille from the moment she walked in. Preston narrowed his eyes, straightened his tie, and started toward them. He moved across the marble as if the whole building belonged to him. Years of authority on that floor had taught him a dangerous lesson. He believed he could decide who belonged and who didn't, and the woman standing beside the scarf display, in his mind, did not belong. He reached them in 8 deliberate steps. He didn't look at Camille. He looked at Kiara. Kiara, step away. Go restock the back display. Kiara blinked. Sir, I'm helping a customer. Did I stutter? Back display. Now. Kiara's mouth opened, then closed. She glanced at Camille with an apology written across her face and stepped back. But she didn't go far. She moved to the next counter, close enough to see, close enough to hear. Preston turned to Camille. He didn't greet her. He didn't smile. He didn't ask what she needed. He looked her up and down. Jeans, boots, cardigan. His expression made it seem as if he were inspecting something the cleaning staff had missed. Ma'am, the exit is behind you. Camille kept her voice even, pleasant, calm, the kind of calm that takes years to learn. I'm actually shopping. I'd like to see the turquoise silk scarf, the maison weave. Preston tilted his head as if she had spoken a language he didn't understand. The mason weave, he repeated, slowly and mockingly. That scarf costs $1,200, ma'am. $1,200. He let the price hang in the air as if he expected the number to do the humiliating for him. Perhaps you'd be more comfortable at the outlet in New Jersey. Camille didn't blink. I'll take 2, actually. Can I see them? Something shifted behind Preston's eyes. She wasn't leaving. She wasn't crying. She wasn't shrinking. She wasn't doing any of the things he had expected. And that made him angry. He raised his voice, not quite shouting, but loud enough for nearby customers to hear. Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. We have a strict policy about loitering. I'm not loitering, sir. I'm trying to make a purchase. And I'm telling you, this isn't the place for you. Heads turned. A woman in a white blazer looked over from handbags. A man near the watches stopped pretending to browse. The pianist kept playing, but the notes seemed softer now, as if even he were listening. Preston stepped closer. Close enough that Camille could smell his sharp, expensive cologne. Open your bag. Camille looked at him. Excuse me. Your bag. Open it. Store policy. We've had issues lately. Issues with what exactly? Preston smiled, but there was no warmth in it. With your type, ma'am, in this department. Then open the bag or I call security and they open it for you. Your type. He said it without trying to hide what he meant. Several people nearby heard him clearly. Camille held his stare for a long moment. I don't believe that's store policy, sir. And I'd like to speak with your general manager. Preston laughed. Short, sharp, ugly. Lady, I am the manager. I run this floor. I run this building. And when I tell you to open your bag, you open your bag. Then I'd like to contact corporate. He leaned in so close Camille could see the pulse in his temple. Corporate doesn't take calls from people like you, sweetheart. The word sweetheart carried so much contempt that it seemed to stain the silence around them. Preston reached for the radio clipped to his belt. Security to women's accessories. Now. Moments later, Graham Mercer came through the staff door. He was 61, white, and built like a retired linebacker. He had worked security at Ashford and Vale for years and had seen almost every kind of trouble a luxury store could produce. The moment he arrived, he could tell the real problem wasn't Camille. It was Preston. What's the situation, Mr. Hargrove? Preston pointed at Camille as if she were evidence. This woman is refusing to comply with a bag check. I need her removed from the premises. Graham looked at Camille, then at the simple leather tote hanging from her shoulder, then back at Preston. Sir, has she taken any merchandise? That's not the point. Has she threatened anyone? I said that's not the point, Graham. Graham paused and chose his words carefully. Mr. Hargrove, I don't see a reason to remove this customer. She hasn't taken anything. She hasn't caused a disturbance. With respect, sir, the only disturbance I'm seeing right now is this conversation. Preston's face turned red, not embarrassed, furious. Are you refusing a direct order? I'm telling you, I don't have grounds to put my hands on this woman, sir. Then I'll do it myself. Graham stepped forward. Mr. Hargrove, I wouldn't recommend that. But Preston was already moving. He grabbed Camille's tote from her shoulder with one hard yank. The leather strap scraped across her skin. She didn't make a sound. Preston turned the bag upside down over the glass display counter. Everything spilled out. A worn leather wallet. A paperback copy of Beloved. A set of house keys. A tube of lip balm. A small leather-bound notebook. And one Pinnacle Holdings business card that landed face down on the glass. There was no stolen merchandise, no fake credit card, no scam, nothing suspicious at all. Only the ordinary belongings of an ordinary woman who had walked in, hoping to buy a scarf. Preston stared at the scattered items. His jaw tightened. I had expected to find something. Anything. Some small detail that would prove him right and justify the scene he had created in front of the other customers. There was nothing. But admitting that he had been wrong in front of Graham, in front of Kiara, and in front of all those watching eyes was something Preston Hargrove could not make himself do. For more than 2 decades, he had been the man people listened to on that floor. He had grown used to not being questioned. So instead of stopping, he doubled down. He picked up Camille's worn wallet with 2 fingers and held it as though it were dirty. This is what you were going to pay with. I tossed it back onto the counter, a $1,200 scarf. And she walks in with a wallet that looks like it came from a thrift store. A woman near the elevator gasped. A man shook his head and looked away. The pianist had stopped playing completely. The only sound was the low hum of the air conditioning and Preston's heavy breathing. Camille began to repack her bag slowly, one item at a time. Wallet, book, keys, lip balm, notebook, then the business card, still face down. She slid it into the side pocket without turning it over. Her hands were steady. Her face was still, but something behind her eyes had changed. Not fear, not sadness. Resolve. She placed the bag back on her shoulder, straightened her cardigan, and looked Preston directly in the eye. Are you finished, sir? Preston stepped closer, towering over her. I'm finished when I say I'm finished. Behind the next counter, Kiara was shaking, but her phone was steady. She had been recording everything, every word, every grab, every sneer. And on Camille's cardigan, just above her heart, the tiny silver brooch caught the overhead light. It was still recording too, quietly capturing every frame. Preston grabbed Camille by the upper arm. It wasn't a gentle touch. It wasn't guidance. It was a hard grip. His fingers pressed through the cardigan hard enough to leave marks. He pulled her away from the counter and started marching her toward the front doors. Walk! Camille didn't resist, but she didn't hurry either. She kept her steps even and measured, almost as if she were the one deciding how fast the moment would move. Sir, take your hand off my arm. He squeezed tighter. You don't tell me what to do in my store. This is assault, sir. This is removal, and you're lucky I don't call the police. He pulled her past perfume, past handbags, past customers who suddenly found the floor very interesting. No one moved. No one spoke. A woman wearing pearls turned her shopping bag so the store logo faced away, as if she wanted distance from what was happening. The pianist's hands hovered above the keys. The silence was worse than music. Phones began to rise. Some were held low. Some were half hidden behind purses and sleeves. People were recording, but many of them still didn't want Preston to see. That is what fear can look like in a luxury store. People witness something wrong. They document it. Yet they still wonder whether speaking openly will make them the next target. Chiara didn't hide her phone. She followed from a few counters back. Tears running down her face, still recording. Graham stood near the entrance, with his jaw clenched and his fists at his sides. He had already refused one improper order. He knew there could be consequences for refusing another, but he also knew there are moments when protecting a paycheck cannot be more important than protecting a person. Preston stopped under the chandelier, the brightest and most public place on the entire floor. He wanted an audience. I wanted people to see what happened in his mind when the wrong kind of woman entered his building. He spun Camille around to face him, his hand still locked around her arm. You know what I think? Camille said nothing. I think you came in here to run a scam. Return fraud, fake receipt, maybe take a few scarves in that ugly little bag of yours. I've seen it before. I came here to buy a scarf, sir. Right. A $1,200 scarf in those jeans. He looked her up and down with theatrical disgust. Lady, your whole outfit doesn't cost $1,200. A few feet away, a white man in a cashmere overcoat pulled his wife closer and whispered something. They didn't leave. They watched as if the scene were entertainment. But not everyone stayed silent. An older white woman with silver hair and a warm southern accent stepped forward from near the elevator. She had the face of someone's grandmother and the courage to make herself visible. Sir, that is enough. Let that woman go. Preston didn't even turn his head. Ma'am, this doesn't concern you. It concerns every person in this store. You are putting your hands on a woman who hasn't done anything. Preston's grip tightened on Camille's arm. One more word and I'll have you removed too. The older woman went quiet. Not because she agreed, because she was afraid, and watching a woman old enough to be his mother. Fall silent because a floor manager had threatened her, told the room everything it needed to know about Preston Hargrove. He turned back to Camille and leaned in close enough that she could smell coffee and peppermint gum on his breath. His voice dropped. I know what you are. I've been doing this for more than 2 decades. I can spot your kind from across the floor. The way you walk. The way you touch things you can't afford. The way you pretend like you belong. He squeezed her arm again. Then he smiled. You don't belong, sweetheart. You never did and you never will. Camille looked up at him, calm and steady. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't rise. Sir, I'm going to ask you one more time. Please, take your hand off me. Preston gave a short, barking laugh. Or what? Then he released her arm. Camille didn't rub the place he had grabbed. She didn't touch the red marks under her sleeve. She simply stood there, still and composed. And that stillness finally unsettled him. Preston had spent years watching people shrink when he confronted them. He had watched customers stammer. He had watched them apologize for taking up space. He had seen black customers, brown customers, immigrants, working-class families, and anyone who arrived wearing the wrong shoes or carrying the wrong bag decide it was easier to leave than to fight for dignity. Camille wasn't shrinking. Camille wasn't leaving. And Preston had no script for that. His right hand came up. Graham saw it first and started moving, but he was too far away. Kiara gasped behind her phone. The older woman covered her mouth. Preston's open palm struck Camille across the left cheek. The sound snapped through the marble room. A child near the shoe department started crying. A man dropped his shopping bag. For a moment, even the air seemed to flinch. Camille's head turned with the blow. Her body stayed planted. Her feet did not move. Preston stood over her, breathing hard, his face twisted with rage and contempt. He pointed at the front door with the same hand that had struck her. "Go away. Your kind does not belong in my store." The words echoed. Now every phone in the room was up. No one was hiding anymore. Camille held still for a brief moment, her face turned away and her eyes lowered. Then she slowly turned back toward Preston. No tears, no trembling, no fear. She looked at him with the calm focus of someone who had finally been given all the evidence she needed. And she smiled. It wasn't warm. It wasn't cruel. It was simply certain. Graham rushed forward. Camille raised one hand, not toward Preston, but toward Graham. "Don't interrupt him. Let him finish his career in his own words." Preston, still breathing hard and still unable to understand the danger he had created for himself, scoffed. "Oh, I'm finished with you. Get out before I call the real police." Camille looked at him one last time. Then she reached into her cardigan pocket. Preston flinched and stepped back. For the first time, real fear appeared in his face. Camille didn't pull out a weapon. She pulled out her phone. She dialed one number, put the call on speaker, and held the phone where everyone nearby could hear. It rang once. "Camille, is everything all right?" The voice belonged to Dorian Beckett. Calm, sharp, professional. The kind of voice used to moving money and making decisions. Camille never took her eyes off Preston. "Dorian, I'm at the Fifth Avenue flagship. I need you to move the public announcement to right now. Pull the human resources complaints for Preston Hargrove from recent years. All of them. Get Lenora on site immediately. Release the press statement now and notify the board." "Camille, are you safe?" Camille tilted her head slightly and looked at Preston. "I'm perfectly safe, Dorian. Mr. Hargrove, on the other hand, is having the last bad day of his professional life." She ended the call. The color left Preston's face almost all at once. His lips moved, but no sound came out at first. Then he whispered, "Who are you?" Camille reached into the same tote bag he had ripped off her shoulder, the same bag he had emptied across the counter, the same bag he had mocked in front of strangers. She pulled out the Pinnacle Holdings business card that had landed face down earlier. She placed it face up on the counter, slowly and deliberately. "Camille Whitmore, Chairwoman and Chief Executive Officer, Pinnacle Holdings Group." Preston stared at the card. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. What Preston didn't know, and what almost nobody in that store knew, was that Pinnacle Holdings had recently completed the takeover of Ashford and Vale's parent company. Every share, every asset, every store. The deal was worth $1.5 billion. The public announcement had been planned for later, but Camille had just moved it forward. That meant the woman Preston had struck. The woman he dragged across the floor. The woman whose bag he emptied and the woman he told did not belong, now controlled 54% of the company that had paid him for more than 2 decades. She controlled the floor he was standing on. She controlled the chandelier above him. She controlled the counter where he had dumped her belongings. She controlled the front door he had tried to force her through. And, most importantly, she controlled whether the culture that had protected behavior like his would continue. Kiara let out a sound that was half laugh and half sob. Her phone was still recording. Graham stood near the door and whispered, "Lord, have mercy." Preston's knees weakened. He reached for the counter to keep himself upright. "Ma'am, there's been a terrible misunderstanding. I didn't know. The policy. I was just doing my job." Camille raised one finger. He stopped talking. She touched the silver brooch pinned above her heart. "Mr. Hargrove, everything you have said and done during this encounter has been recorded in ultra-high definition from a body camera on my person. Preston's eyes dropped to the brooch. His face crumpled. Everything, the words, the grab, the bag, the strike, your kind. People like you steal. Corporate doesn't take calls from people like you. Camille let the phrases hang in the silence one by one. I am corporate, Mr. Hargrove, and I take complaints very seriously. Preston opened his mouth. Nothing came out. His hand still gripped the counter. His knuckles had gone white. The older woman who had spoken up earlier stepped forward again. This time she wasn't afraid. Tears ran down her cheeks, but she was smiling. The glass doors opened. Vivian Caldwell, the Human Resources Director, entered quickly with her phone pressed to her ear and urgency written across her face. 2 attorneys followed behind her. Then, a reporter. Outside the floor-to-ceiling windows, a news van was already pulling toward the curb, and a camera crew was stepping onto Fifth Avenue. Preston saw the van. His legs finally gave way. He sat down on the marble beneath the chandelier. A man who had once carried himself as if he owned the building, now unable to hold himself upright. Camille didn't look at him. She turned to Kiara, who was still crying, still holding her phone, still standing where she had witnessed everything. Kiara, I'd still like to buy that turquoise scarf. 2 of them, actually. Would you ring me up? Kiara wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, nodded, and stepped behind the register on shaking legs. The customers, the staff, the pianist, the older woman, and Graham began to applaud. Camille didn't acknowledge the applause. She simply placed her credit card on the counter, picked up the turquoise silk, and held it toward the light. It was the same kind of scarf her mother had once saved so long to buy. Now Camille owned the company that made it. Vivian didn't waste a moment. She walked directly to Preston, who was still sitting on the marble floor, and stood over him with a single sheet of paper in her hand. Mr. Hargrove, stand up. I didn't move. I said, stand up. Graham stepped forward and took Preston by the elbow. Not rough, not gentle, professional. He brought him to his feet. Vivian held the paper where Preston could see it. This is your termination letter. Effective immediately for cause. No severance, no reference, no appeal. Your company phone, your keys, and your badge. Now. Preston's hands were shaking. He fumbled with the radio on his belt and dropped it. It struck the marble with a hard clatter. He unclipped his badge, removed his lanyard, and placed both on the counter beside Camille's turquoise scarf. His voice came out thin and cracked, nothing like the man who had been barking orders earlier. Vivian, please. I've given more than 2 decades to this company. My kids, my mortgage. You can't just do this. Mr. Hargrove, you assaulted a customer on camera. You used racist language on camera. You searched a woman's personal belongings without cause or consent on camera. Vivian let the words settle. There is no responsible company that can keep you in management after what happened here. You know that. Preston turned toward Camille. His eyes were wet and red around the edges. Ma'am, Miss Whitmore, please. I didn't know. If I had known who you were, I never would have done any of this. Camille cut him off, not with anger, but with disappointment. That's the problem, Mr. Hargrove. You would have treated me differently if you had known who I was, which means you were willing to treat any black woman without a powerful title, the way you treated me today. Preston's mouth opened, then closed. There was no answer that could repair what he had just admitted. The doors opened again. 2 New York City police officers entered. One of them, Officer Adrian Wolfe, was tall and calm. Graham moved toward them immediately. Officers, there was an assault on a customer. I witnessed it. There is video from multiple angles. Kiara stepped forward and handed her phone to Officer Wolfe. He watched enough of the footage to understand what had happened. Then he looked at Preston. Sir, turn around and place your hands behind your back. Officer, this is a misunderstanding. I was just doing my job. Sir, turn around. Preston turned. The handcuffs clicked around one wrist, then the other. The sound was small, but inside the silent store, it carried. Officer Wolfe explained that Preston was being taken into custody in connection with misdemeanor assault in the 3rd degree. aggravated harassment in the second degree, with a bias crime enhancement under New York penal law, and unlawful imprisonment. Preston's face collapsed. Bias crime. Hate crime. I'm not. I didn't. It wasn't about that. Sir, I'd recommend that you stop talking and wait for your attorney. The officers walked him toward the entrance. They took him past handbags, past perfume, past the same stretch of marble where he had dragged Camille. Only now, he was the person being removed. The doorman, the same man who had hesitated before opening the door for Camille, stood at the entrance and pulled the door all the way open for the officers. Outside, the news camera was already rolling. A reporter spoke into a microphone, while pedestrians slowed down and lifted their phones. In the back of the police vehicle, Preston kept talking under his breath. I was just doing my job. She was acting suspicious. It's not what it looked like. Officer Wolf glanced at his partner, then looked into the rearview mirror. Sir, everything you're saying is being recorded. I strongly advise you to stop. Preston finally stopped talking. He stared through the window at the gold Ashford and Vale letters set into black marble as the car pulled away. More than 2 decades of authority had collapsed because of a single chain of choices he had made in one encounter. Back inside, Camille stood at the register. Chiara handed her the turquoise scarf wrapped in tissue paper and tucked inside a black box with gold letters. It was the same kind of box Loretta had held in the photograph on the mantel. Camille ran her fingers across the gold lettering. Ashford and Vale. Her phone buzzed. A message from Dorian said the press release was live. Major outlets had picked it up, and Camille's name was spreading everywhere. She slid the phone back into her pocket and lifted the box. Then she looked around at the employees standing in small groups, at Graham still near the door, and at Chiara wiping her eyes behind the register. Camille spoke quietly, but everyone heard her. I'll be back, and things are going to be very different around here. The story spread across the country. The phrase Ashford apology began trending nationwide, and the reaction became impossible for the company to ignore. Pinnacle Holdings sent in a new compliance team, led by Camille's personal attorney, Lenora Price. They entered Ashford and Vale's corporate headquarters with legal authority to access the company's human resources files from recent years. What they found showed that the assault on Fifth Avenue had not happened in isolation. Preston Hargrove had 15 prior complaints in his personnel file. 15. Black customers had been asked to leave without cause. A Latino couple had been followed through the store by security on Preston's direct order. A young black teenager had been accused of stealing a bracelet she had already paid for. Preston had pulled it off her wrist at the door. Every complaint had been filed by a person of color. Every complaint had been buried by a middle manager named Douglas Merritt, who had closed each file with the same words. No further action required. Douglas was terminated, but Lenora kept digging. She reviewed Preston's company phone records and his text messages from recent years. What she found turned a single assault case into a wider investigation. Preston had been part of a private group chat with 4 other Ashford and Vale managers working across 3 stores. They called it the Watch List. The name sounded official, professional. It was anything but. Inside that group chat, the managers shared physical descriptions of Black and Latino customers they considered suspicious. The messages often said nothing about behavior. They focused on skin color, clothing, hairstyle. One message from Preston warned the others about a black woman with braids and a puffy jacket and told them to watch her because, in his words, they always try something. Another manager warned the group about 2 Latino teenagers near the watches and wrote, "You know the drill." 5 managers, 3 stores. A long pattern of coordinated racial profiling disguised as loss prevention. The other managers involved were fired. 2 were referred to the Department of Justice for possible civil rights violations. Their messages and photographs appeared across major news outlets. The consequences spread beyond human resources. Ashford and Vale had a crown jewel contract, a $1.5 billion luxury partnership with Stellar Airlines. The company supplied scarves, leather goods, and amenity kits for the airline's very important customer membership program. The deal had supported the retailer financially for years. Then, the chief executive officer of Stellar Airlines appeared on live television behind a podium bearing the airline's logo and announced that the partnership was ending immediately. $1.5 billion in business vanished. The public statement said the relationship was no longer consistent with Stellar's stated values and its commitment to dignity for all customers. Ashford and Vail's stock fell 18% over several trading days. Analysts described the collapse as one of the fastest brand crises luxury retail had seen. But Camille did not buy the company to destroy it. She called an emergency board meeting and presented a long-term transformation plan. No layoffs for frontline workers, new leadership, new training, a new culture. The stock eventually stabilized. Camille wasn't there to let Ashford and Vail bleed out. She wanted to rebuild it into the kind of place her mother would have been proud to enter. Later, Lenora filed a civil lawsuit. The complaint named Preston individually for assault, battery, false imprisonment, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. It also named the old Ashford and Vail corporate entity for a pattern of racial profiling and the systematic burial of customer complaints. Camille announced publicly that every dollar recovered through the civil case would go to a new foundation, the Loretta Whitmore Retail Dignity Fund, named after her mother. The foundation would provide free legal representation to shoppers in America who experienced racial profiling in a retail environment. Standing before cameras, Camille explained why. My mother saved for a year to buy me one scarf from a store that might have thrown her out. No one should ever have to earn the right to be treated like a human being while spending their own money. The jury eventually awarded Camille $2.8 million in compensatory and punitive damages from Preston personally. Camille directed the money to the Loretta Whitmore Fund. Preston could not pay the judgment. His house went into foreclosure soon after. His marriage separated under the pressure. The authority he had carried for more than 2 decades, the power he had used to decide who belonged and who didn't, had collapsed into consequences he could no longer control. But the civil case wasn't the only legal weight he faced. The criminal case moved forward as well. Judge Celeste Rowan presided over a packed courtroom. Preston pleaded not guilty at first. His attorney argued emotional distress and workplace pressure. Then prosecutors played the recording from Camille's brooch. Ultra-high-definition video, clear color, clear audio, uninterrupted evidence. Every word Preston had said, every grab, every sneer, the moment he struck her, captured from only a few feet away. And his voice, sharp and unmistakable. Go away. Your kind does not belong in my store. The courtroom fell silent. Preston's own attorney closed his folder. Kiara Bell later took the witness stand. She was 24, her hands folded in her lap, and her voice shook at first. Then it steadied. Then it grew strong. She described what she had seen, what she had heard, what it felt like to stand behind that counter and watch a man strike a woman, because he had already decided that her skin color, clothing, and presence made her suspicious. By the time Kiara finished, several jurors were crying. Preston changed his plea to guilty. Judge Rowan sentenced him to 18 months of incarceration, followed by 3 years of probation. She also ordered mandatory bias intervention programming, a lifetime ban from retail management positions in the state of New York, and 500 hours of community service at a nonprofit selected by Camille. Camille chose a community center in Harlem that served survivors of racially motivated violence. It was close to the brownstone where her mother had lived. Before Preston was taken away, Judge Rowan looked down from the bench and spoke slowly. Mr. Hargrove, the hand you raised in that store and the words you used are part of a long history of Black Americans being treated as though they must prove their right to stand in stores, on streets, and in public spaces. This court answers your conduct with accountability. Preston was escorted from the courtroom in handcuffs. I didn't look up. I didn't speak. Outside, Cameras captured every step. Camille gave one interview after the case, not to a national network, not to a famous cable host. She chose a young black woman journalist at a small community newspaper in Detroit, the kind of paper her mother had once read at the kitchen table. The journalist asked Camille what justice meant to her. Camille thought for a moment. My mother saved for a year to buy me one scarf from a store that might have thrown her out. I'm going to walk into that store's boardroom and hang her photograph on the wall. That's the only revenge I'm interested in. Months later, the Fifth Avenue flagship still had the same marble and the same piano, but something about the building felt different the moment people entered. Above the main staircase, where a corporate logo had once hung, there was now a bronze plaque. Simple, elegant. 5 words were etched into the metal. The Loretta Whitmore Atrium. Beneath the plaque was a black and white photograph of a black woman in her 40s, smiling so widely that the joy reached her eyes. In her hands was a turquoise gift box with gold lettering. Loretta, the woman who worked 3 jobs, the woman who saved for a year, the woman who raised a daughter in public housing and never told her there were doors she couldn't open. Below the photograph, a single engraved sentence welcomed every customer who crossed the threshold as family. The store changed in ways that could not be hung on a wall, too. Bystander training became mandatory for all 12,000 employees across every location. A customer bill of rights was posted at every entrance in 4 languages. An independent ombuds office was created to report directly to the board. A new promotion pipeline was built for frontline employees, one that did not depend on having the right family name or fitting the image of the old leadership. Kiara Bell became the face of that pipeline. The young junior sales associate was promoted to floor manager of the Fifth Avenue flagship, making her the youngest person in the company's history to hold that position. She wore a navy blazer with a small gold pin on the lapel. Her name tag no longer said sales associate. It said manager. Kiara Bell. Graham Mercer was promoted too. Hy became director of ethics and floor conduct training across the chain. Hy traveled between stores, teaching security teams one simple principle: protect the customer, not the ego of the person signing your schedule. Months after the confrontation, a young black girl walked through the front doors of Ashford and Vale's flagship, holding her grandmother's hand. She was about 12, with braids and a pink backpack. The doorman opened the door without hesitation, all the way, and smiled as they passed. The girl looked up at the vaulted ceilings, the gold leaf and the chandelier. Her eyes widened with the kind of wonder only a child can carry without trying to hide it. Kiara spotted them from across the floor. She walked over and knelt to the girl's level. "Welcome. Can I help you find something today?" The girl looked at her grandmother. Her grandmother nodded. "My grandma wants to show me the scarves. She said a lady like me owns the whole store now." Kiara smiled, the kind of smile that starts in the chest and reaches the face before you can stop it. "She does, sweetheart. Let me show you her favorite." Kiara took the girl's hand and walked her toward the turquoise display on the mezzanine, the same place where Preston Hargrove had once stood with his clipboard, deciding who looked as though they belonged. Camille Whitmore stood watching from above. She wore a simple black dress, flats, and her mother's thin gold chain around her neck. She watched Kiara kneel beside the girl. She watched the girl's fingers move across the turquoise silk. She watched the grandmother lift a hand toward her mouth, trying not to cry. Camille touched the gold chain at her throat. She didn't cry either. She didn't need to. Everything she had ever wanted to say to her mother was happening on the floor below her, not as a speech, but as a changed reality. The piano began playing again, something soft, something warm. The notes drifted through the atrium and settled around the bronze plaque like a quiet hymn. Loretta's photograph smiled down over all of it. "If this story made you feel something, maybe anger, maybe hope, maybe a quiet fire inside you, then do 3 things for me. First, like this story. It genuinely helps this channel keep telling stories like this one. Second, subscribe. There will be more stories about ordinary people whose dignity is tested and whose choices reveal who they really are. Third, share this with one person who may need the reminder that power isn't always loud, wealth isn't always visible, and the quietest person in the room may be carrying more strength than anyone realizes. And tell me in the comments if you've ever seen someone underestimate the wrong person and learn a lesson from it. I'm reading every reply. The next story might even be about someone in your city. Because judging someone by skin color, clothing, accent, income, age, or appearance is never a shortcut to the truth. A person doesn't become worthy of respect after you discover a title, a bank account, or a powerful connection. They were worthy of respect before you knew any of that. Camille's story isn't powerful because she owned the company. It's powerful because the way Preston treated her would have been wrong even if she had been unemployed, broke, unknown, and alone. That may be the most important lesson in the whole story. Dignity should never depend on status. Kindness should never depend on who is watching. And character is often revealed in the way we treat someone when we believe they have nothing to offer us. There is another lesson too. Staying calm does not mean staying weak. Camille didn't need to shout to prove she had strength. Graham didn't need to become violent to refuse an improper order. Kiara didn't need a title to document what she knew was wrong. The older woman didn't need to know Camille's identity before speaking up. Each person had a choice. Some choices caused harm. Other choices protected dignity. And every choice carried consequences. Accountability matters, but accountability doesn't have to be the end of the story. Camille could have used her power only to punish. Instead, she used it to change training, leadership, promotion, reporting, and customer protections. She turned one painful experience into a reason to build something better for people she would never meet. That is where justice becomes bigger than revenge. It becomes responsibility. It becomes repair. It becomes a promise that the next person who walks through the door will not have to fight the same battle alone. Forgiveness, when it is possible, does not mean pretending harm never happened. Compassion does not mean removing consequences. We can hold people responsible and still choose not to let bitterness become the thing that defines us. We can learn. We can change. We can create systems that make it easier for good people to speak up and harder for harmful behavior to hide behind silence. And maybe that is the quietest lesson of all. Most of us will never own a company. Most of us will never stand in a courtroom with cameras outside. But every one of us will stand in smaller moments where someone is ignored, judged, embarrassed, dismissed, or treated unfairly. In those moments, we get to choose who we are. We can look away. We can join the crowd. Or we can make room for dignity. We can ask one more question before judging. We can refuse to humiliate someone for being different. We can speak when silence would be easier. We can remember that a stranger carries a whole life we cannot see. A mother who sacrificed. A child who is watching. A family depending on them. A dream they are still trying to reach. Treat people like people. It really isn't that hard.